The dawn shivers upon the horizon, and mist clings to the moat like the memory of a vanished sea. From its surface, the reflection of 5 towers rises, black, jagged, perfect. This is Angkor Wat, a city once meant for gods, now ruled only by silence. The air tastes of wet stone and lotus bloom. The first light bends across carvings that once bled with color, across walls that held the prayers of kings who believed themselves divine. Here, time stands still, as if the temple itself is breathing, waiting for someone to remember. In the 12th century, this land was not quiet. It thundered with ambition. The jungles were cut and burned, rivers tamed into straight channels, and the earth was reshaped to please a single man, Suryavarman II, the god king. His crown glittered with gold, but its real weight was faith itself. He was chosen, or so they said, to merge heaven and earth, to carve eternity into stone. His name was whispered with a mix of reverence and fear, for he claimed not merely to rule by the gods, but as one. Under his vision, the Khmer Empire swelled like the breath of a monsoon. Villages became armies, and armies became builders. From the quarries of Kulin Mountain, sandstone blocks heavier than oxen were dragged through dense forest and blistering heat. 300,000 laborers, men, women, and children, their skin burned, their feet bled, their bodies bent to his divine design. 6,000 elephants groaned under their burdens, the earth trembling beneath their feet. In this world, devotion was measured not by prayer, but by pain. They said each tower of Angkor mirrored a peak of Mount Meru, the sacred mountain where the gods reside. Every hallway stretched toward a cardinal direction, every gate open to the cosmos. This temple was not built to house mortals. It was meant to lure heaven itself to dwell on earth. When the king walked through its corridors, he did so barefoot, cloaked in silence, surrounded by priests chanting hymns in Sanskrit. The smell of sandalwood thickened the air. Gold leaf shimmered under torchlight, and in that glow you could almost believe he was more than a man. But perfection demands sacrifice. For every polished wall, 100 backs broke. The stone carried not just carvings, but cries. Beneath the beauty, there was hunger, an empire feeding itself on faith. They called it devotion. But for the builders, it was survival under the gaze of a god who would not blink. As the temple grew, so did its shadow. The people began to see omens, serpents in the wells, fires in the forest, storms that lasted too long. Yet construction never stopped. To pause was blasphemy. They believed that only through endless work could the king's spirit ascend. Even when fever spread through the camps and the dead were burned by the dozens, the chisels never fell silent. Stone dust hung like mist in the air, a second skin for those who labored. In the galleries, carvings began to appear, scenes of war and glory, angels and demons locked in an eternal struggle. The king's image towered above all others, serene and victorious, his hands folded in a divine gesture. But his eyes, even in stone, seemed restless. Perhaps he knew that power, once claimed from heaven, must always be defended against the earth. The empire thrived, yet a quiet unease grew beneath its splendor. Suryavarman's wars stretched the kingdom's edges too thin, his demands drained the granaries, his faith consumed his people. Priests whispered that his reach had angered the old gods. Astrologers read the stars and found chaos in their paths. Still, he pressed on. The city rose higher, and with it, the illusion of eternity. The central tower, the heart of Angkor Wat, was his promised heaven. When it neared completion, he ordered the entire temple to be encircled by water. To outsiders, it was a moat. To believers, it was the cosmic ocean, separating the mortal from the divine. Within its bounds, he would rule forever. The moat reflected not just the temple, but the idea that heaven had found its mirror on earth. And yet, beneath that reflection, the water whispered another truth. The more he tried to shape the world to his image, the more it began to resist. The floods came earlier. The rains grew wild. The canals clogged with silt, refusing to obey their makers. The jungle, ever patient, began to creep back toward the walls. It was as though the land itself remembered who it once belonged to. The king aged, but the temple did not forgive time. Its stones held fast, while his body weakened. He watched the sun align perfectly with the central tower, the divine geometry fulfilled, but no voice answered from the heavens. Only the wind moved, sighing through the corridors like the breath of forgotten gods. He died before his empire reached its final shape. His ashes, they say, were carried into the sanctuary and sealed within its heart, his soul ascending through the stone tower to Vishnu's realm. Outside, the people wept, not for their god-king, but for what would come after him. Because when faith builds an empire around one man, it cannot survive him. Years passed. The jungle tightened its green fist. The new kings kept building, yet none could match his vision. The canals dried in drought, then burst in flood. The monuments multiplied, but their purpose faded. Still, Angkor Wat stood, too perfect to abandon, too sacred to live within. It became both a shrine and a ghost. Now, centuries later, the temple breathes again beneath the weight of dawn. Its stones sweat with dew. The air carries the scent of wet earth and incense. The carvings still tell their stories, of conquest, of faith, of beauty bought with suffering. And as sunlight spills across the towers, it feels less like a new day, and more like a memory. The earth remembering the fever of gods who once walked here. They believed eternity would know their names. But eternity remembers differently. The towers glow for a moment, suspended between earth and sky, then fade into mist. And somewhere, in the still water below, the face of a forgotten king ripples, as if the stone itself is dreaming. The city has risen, but the shadow that will one day consume it has already begun to stir. Thank you for... Night falls heavy upon the jungles of Angkor. The air hums with drums, low, rhythmic, ancient. In the flickering torchlight, thousands of people gather before the great temple, their faces painted in trembling flame. The scent of incense hangs thick in the air, so dense that every breath feels like a prayer. At the very center of this grand ceremony stands the king. His skin is painted in gold, and his crown is aflame with jewels that catch the firelight, making him look like a celestial being. His gaze is distant, fixed not on the people who bow before him, but on the vast, dark heavens above. In this moment, he no longer looks like a man. He looks like a god pretending to remember what it means to be human. This is the Khmer Empire at its absolute peak. A sprawling network of roads, carved through dense forests, connects distant provinces. Armies march under banners of flame and faith, their loyalty unwavering. The king's word is law, his mere presence an act of worship. This is the era of the Devaraja, the god-king. Under this powerful doctrine, the king is believed to be a living embodiment of the Hindu god Vishnu, the protector of the universe. To serve him is to serve divinity itself. To disobey him is to defy the very cosmos. It is a theology built on awe and fear, sanctified by elaborate rituals and, sometimes, by blood. In the hallowed courtyards of Angkor, massive stone basins fill with offerings, fragrant rice, gleaming gold, delicate flowers, and at times, the flesh of sacrifice. The priests chant verses older than memory, their voices weaving a hypnotic spell through the smoke. They claim the gods hunger for devotion, and that true devotion demands sacrifice. The peasants obey, because what is a single human life when weighed against eternity? The king no longer watches these ceremonies with the eyes of a participant. He commands them. He believes the gods require his guidance, that without his divine will, heaven itself might lose its delicate balance. But around him, the empire begins to strain. To the west, enemy forces press relentlessly at the borders. To the east, a creeping famine rots the crops in the fields. Yet within the stone walls of Angkor, the illusion of perfection persists. The illusion that divine rule guarantees eternal order. The court poets compose songs of glorious victory. Sculptors immortalize epic conquests in stone. The bas-reliefs on the temple walls grow longer, grander, more crowded with celestial angels and fierce warriors. But no one carves the images of hunger, of sickness, of the quiet terror that grips the villages beyond the city. The central figure beside the king is Jayendra, his high priest. Once a scholar dedicated to knowledge, he is now the official voice of devotion. Jayendra sees the kingdom as a living ritual, a vast ongoing ceremony in which every single act is a form of worship. He firmly believes that to question the king is to fracture the divine order of the universe. Yet, as the years pass, his eyes begin to betray something else, the slow, painful awakening of doubt. He sees the true cost of this divine ambition. The temples multiply, but the granaries empty. The rivers that once shimmered with fish now flow sluggish and heavy with silt from the endless construction. In secret, the peasants whisper prayers to the old spirits of the land, the ones who came before the gods of the temple. The god king's dream is consuming everything. Jayendra watches as laborers, driven by faith and fear, collapse in the blistering heat, their bodies hauled away without a name or a final prayer. He smells the smoke of offerings that were once the homes of families. The priests call it piety. Jayendra begins to call it silence. Still, he serves, because faith, when it is bound inextricably to power, leaves no room for rebellion. He begins to wonder quietly if even the gods ever wanted such relentless devotion, or if they too have become prisoners of his king's insatiable desire. The king, meanwhile, grows more restless. His victories on the battlefield feel hollow, his elaborate rituals unsatisfying. Each new offering must be greater than the last, as if blood could somehow fill the deafening silence between him and the heavens he claims to represent. He walks through the silent halls of Angkor at night, a single torch in hand, touching the cold stone carvings of the gods with trembling fingers. Their faces are serene, eternal, and impassive. His is not. They do not speak, he whispers into the darkness. They only watch. The torchlight wavers, and for a fleeting moment, the carved eyes of the statues seem to stare back with a look of pity. The conflict deepens, not between armies on a battlefield, but between belief and truth within the hearts of the people. The king's divinity, once an unquestionable fact, begins to decay in the minds of men. Rumors spread like wildfire through the villages, whispers that devastating droughts follow his footsteps, that the rivers turn red where his priests bathe. Yet no one dares to speak these fears openly. The illusion of the god-king must survive, for without it, the entire empire could collapse into chaos. Faith has become a chain, and the magnificent temple its shackle. On the terraces of Angkor Wat, intricate carvings of the churning of the ocean of milk stretch across the stone walls. This epic scene depicts gods and demons pulling on a giant serpent, wrapped around a mountain, to stir the sea and extract the elixir of immortality. It is the foundational story of creation, of struggle, of the endless labor required to sustain cosmic balance. The scene is breathtaking in its artistry, but it is also a prophecy. For the Khmer Empire itself has become that mountain, pulled at by gods and men alike, trapped in a desperate struggle to preserve a sense of eternity, while the world all around it changes. Jayendra, the high priest, begins to secretly record what he sees. His notes, inscribed on fragile palm leaves, are not meant for worship but for remembrance. He writes of the crushing heat, of the endless ceremonies, of the relentless, echoing sound of chisels that never rest. He writes of the king's voice, once radiant with conviction, now growing harsher, his faith turning desperate. He writes of a man who is no longer a god, but a mortal shadowed by fear. The high priest knows what others cannot yet admit. Their god is dying, and his death will not be a gentle one. In one final, desperate ritual meant to restore divine favor, the king orders a grand offering at the temple's heart. Thousands gather. The drums thunder like an approaching storm. Elephants adorned in silk and gold kneel in reverence. Torches bloom across the vast courtyard like a field of miniature suns. The king ascends the steep steps, his crown gleaming, his robes soaked in sacred oil. Jayendra stands below, his eyes closed, his lips trembling in a silent prayer. He knows what must happen, but he also knows he will not, and cannot, stop it. As the chant of the priests rises to a fever pitch, the king lifts his hands to the sky. "Let heaven witness," he proclaims, his voice breaking with emotion, "that I am its reflection on earth." The crowd bows as one, a wave of humanity prostrating itself before him. The wind falls utterly still. For a single heartbeat, even time itself seems to hold its breath. And then, the torches flicker. A tremor ripples through the earth. One of the massive stone pillars of the temple cracks. A sound as sharp and final as a bone breaking. The crowd gasps. The sky does not answer. Later, Jayendra will call it a coincidence. Others will call it an omen. But in that chilling moment, the king lowers his hands and stares into the empty void above him. And for the very first time, he looks afraid. The drums fade into silence. The smoke thins and drifts away. The ritual ends, not in triumph, but in a profound, unsettling quiet. The people leave, uncertain, whispering prayers not of devotion but of doubt. The king retreats into the shadowy depths of the temple, and this time no one follows him. Jayendra lingers at the gate, watching the reflection of the temple's towers tremble in the still water of the moat. He thinks of all that has been built, and all that has been taken, and how fragile the image of a god can be. When dawn returns, the temple stands as it always has, vast, serene, eternal. Yet something invisible has cracked deep within its heart. Faith has begun to falter. The god-king is still worshipped, but now the prayers sound hollow, echoing off empty stone. The empire does not know it yet, but it has begun to bleed from within, and somewhere in the still air above the jungle, a whisper stirs. Not of worship, but of warning. The age of blood and the jungle presses closer now. Its roots curl like fingers around the temple's base, creeping over the carved faces of gods long forgotten. The air, once filled with the hymns of thousands, now hums only with the drone of insects. Rainwater pools in the courtyards where kings once walked, and the reflection in the moat, though still beautiful, trembles, distorted. It's as if the heavens themselves have begun to forget their own image. The empire that called itself eternal is dying. This is the story of Angkor, but not the one of its glorious rise. This is the story of its fall. The canals that once fed the rice fields, the lifeblood of a civilization, are clogged with silt. Their waters have become stagnant and dark. The monsoons, once predictable blessings, now come too late or too hard. The seasons themselves have turned against the land. The people whisper that the gods have turned away, and they are not wrong. What was once unwavering faith has curdled into ruin. The god-king's throne now belongs to another, Jayavarman VII. He is a ruler not of fire, but of fatigue. He inherits not glory, but ghosts. The grandeur of the old kings lies around him in fragments. Toppled towers, dry reservoirs, and villages abandoned to hunger. His face is calm, his eyes dark, his spirit heavy with the weight of a crumbling world. He no longer calls himself divine. He calls himself a servant to the Buddha, to the suffering, to what remains of his people. Under his rule, a new faith begins to rise from the ashes of the old. The temples that once sang of Vishnu now whisper the prayers of the Buddha. The air fills not with the pounding of war drums, but with the slow, meditative cadence of monks chanting under the banyan trees. They speak of mercy instead of conquest, of impermanence instead of eternity. Yet the shadow of the old gods lingers. Their images remain carved into every wall, their stories etched into every corridor. The city cannot forget what it was built for, and neither can its people. Wandering these silent corridors is Jayendra, now an old man. Once the high priest of a god-king, he is now little more than a hermit within the very temple he helped sanctify. He runs his fingers along the walls he once blessed, tracing the epic battles and myths that time has already begun to erase. His hand pauses on a carving of the king he once served. The face is worn, half swallowed by moss. He can no longer tell if it was meant to depict divinity or despair. Perhaps it was always both. Jayendra no longer believes in the perfection of faith. He believes only in its weight, how it crushes, how it blinds. Yet even now, as he looks upon the crumbling reliefs, he feels a quiet reverence for what they built. He knows that human hands, for all their cruelty and arrogance, carved something here that even the relentless jungle struggles to destroy. It is the paradox that haunts him, that from hubris such profound beauty could still be born. But beauty cannot feed the hungry. Beyond the temple walls, the empire fractures. Rebellions flare along the borders. Distant kingdoms, Siam, Champa, Ayutthaya, begin to rise, and each one tests the fading might of the Khmers. The armies that once marched for heaven now fight merely to survive. The fields lie fallow, the canals are dry, and the people scatter like dust in the wind. What was once the heart of a divine empire becomes a wilderness of stone and silence. Jayavarman watches as the last of his builders abandon their work. The great reservoirs, the barrays, once vast inland seas of life, are now cracked and dust-dry mirrors of the drought. He kneels beside one, its bottom exposed to the unforgiving sun, and closes his eyes. "Even the gods thirst," he murmurs. The monks standing behind him bow their heads but say nothing. They know that words cannot summon rain. The central conflict is no longer between men, but between belief and decay. The old order has collapsed, yet the new one cannot fully take root. Buddhism preaches detachment, but how does an entire nation detach from its own bones? Every road seems to lead back to Angkor, and every path ends at its gates. The people still come here to pray, to leave offerings, to ask for forgiveness from gods they no longer remember by name. The jungle breathes louder. Each year it claims more stone. The serpentine roots of fig and banyan trees split ancient walls apart. Lichen, like a slow-growing disease, eats away at the faces of the celestial dancers, the apsaras. The temple begins its inevitable merger with the earth, as if returning to the womb that once birthed it. The monks see this as natural, a lesson in impermanence. All things, they say, must end. But to Jayendra, it feels like penance. The city built from pride is being buried in humility. There are no invaders at the gates. No great climactic battle marks the fall of Angkor. It happens quietly, like a candle dying after its flame has gone unseen for too long. The court eventually moves south to the area of modern-day Phnom Penh, seeking fresher land and safer trade routes. The royal palace is empty. The artisans, the scholars, the dancers, they all vanish into the jungle or journey to the new capital. The temple is left alone, its silence heavier and more profound than the noise of any war. In his final years, Jayendra walks the corridors one last time. He carries no sacred scrolls, no precious relics, only the weight of his memory. The vibrant murals are fading, the armies, the kings, the divine battles, all are slipping into shadow. He stops at the Great Causeway, the stone bridge where, centuries ago, a god-king's reflection shone beside the rising sun. Now, only his own tired face looks back at him from a stagnant pool of water. He kneels. The stone is cold beneath his skin. He whispers a prayer, not for salvation, but for remembrance. "May they forgive us," he says softly, his voice swallowed by the immense space, "for mistaking power for godhood." As if in answer, a storm begins to rise in the distance. The air grows thick, smelling of wet leaves and smoke. A bolt of lightning flashes, illuminating the 5 iconic towers for one brief, dazzling moment. It feels like the breath of something vast, not divine, but simply eternal. And then the rain comes. It is relentless. Water pours through the corridors, filling the basins, washing over the carvings and the altars alike. The city drinks again, but not as it once did. This rain does not bless, it erases. By dawn the jungle steams. A thick mist curls over the moats. The monks have retreated deeper into their sanctuaries. Jayendra's chamber is found empty. Only his robes remain, folded neatly beside a single stone idol of the Buddha. Perhaps he simply walked into the forest. Perhaps he became part of the temple he could never abandon. His name, like the kings before him, vanishes into the silence. And so Angkor falls. Not to an enemy, not to fire, but to the slow, impartial mercy of time. Its towers still stand, but its spirit is gone. The temple that once reached for heaven now sinks back into the earth, half devoured, half preserved. It is no longer the city of god-kings. It is a grave of faith. Yet in its decay there is a strange and profound peace. The Empire's dream has ended, but something softer remains. A whisper of our shared humanity, of our fragility, of what it means to build something that endures long beyond the beliefs that created it. History exhales. The gods have fallen silent, but the stone still listens. And beneath the roots, in the darkness where no prayer can reach, the earth simply waits. It waits for rediscovery, for remembrance, for the echo of footsteps that will, one day, return. Thank you for watching. Centuries pass. The forest thickens, swallowing stone and memory alike. What was once the heart of an empire becomes only a rumor whispered among villagers. Tales of towers taller than trees, of gods carved in living rock, of a city where the earth itself seemed to pray. Few believe them. Fewer still dare to seek. The jungle has become a guardian, its silence a warning. But in the year 1860, curiosity returns. A French naturalist named Henri Mouhot pushes through the undergrowth, his machete striking against roots thicker than his arm. His journal, soaked by rain, trembles in his hand as he writes between breaths. He does not yet know what he is about to find, only that something ancient calls to him through the vines. The air grows cooler as he walks deeper. His boots sink into moss and centuries of decay. The forest seems to hold its breath. Then, through a veil of mist, he sees it. A spire of stone rising from the green, impossibly tall, impossibly intricate. For a moment he thinks it cannot be real, that the jungle is playing tricks on him. But when he pushes the leaves aside, his breath catches. Before him stands the lost city of Angkor. The towers shimmer in the afternoon light, each one carved with thousands of faces. Time has worn them smooth, but their eyes remain calm, eternal, knowing. Henri stands speechless, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. This, he murmurs to himself, this was not built by men. It is not arrogance that makes him say it, but awe. The scale is beyond comprehension. Every wall is a story, every shadow a prayer. He steps into the first corridor. The carvings stretch endlessly. Battles, processions, gods in motion. The walls seem alive. He touches one of the bas-reliefs, tracing the lines of a celestial dancer whose smile has survived the centuries. "You are still here," he whispers. His voice echoes faintly, as though the stones themselves are listening. But beneath the wonder lies unease. The jungle's grip is not gentle. Roots burst through walls, prying apart what once seemed eternal. Henri realizes he is not rediscovering a city. He is witnessing its struggle to stay alive. The forest is winning. Vines hang like veins across the corridors. Trees grow from rooftops, their roots clawing downward like desperate hands. Each step forward feels like trespassing on something sacred, something wounded. At night, Henri camps near the moat. Fireflies drift over the still water. In the distance, the towers glow silver beneath the moon. He cannot sleep. His mind races with questions. Who built this, and why? How could such magnificence vanish from the world's memory? He turns a page in his journal and writes, "The hand of man built this, but the soul of gods inspired it." He closes the book, unaware that his words will one day awaken the world to Angkor once more. The next morning, he ventures deeper. The air feels different, heavier, almost reverent. A small shrine still stands within a collapsed hall. Inside, a single statue of the Buddha sits cross-legged amid the rubble, covered in moss yet unbroken. Sunlight filters through a crack in the ceiling, falling across its serene face. Henri kneels without thinking. For the first time, he feels not like a discoverer, but like a witness. The central conflict stirs quietly within him, awe battling understanding, reverence clashing with reason. He is a man of science, trained to categorize, to measure. Yet here, logic fails. The stones speak of something deeper, not conquest or empire, but faith enduring decay. He begins to question whether progress, the very idea that drives his nation's pride, is any nobler than what was lost here. As he explores, Henri finds inscriptions in forgotten scripts. He sketches them carefully, knowing that time is erasing them faster than ink can preserve. Each symbol feels like a heartbeat, faint, fading, but not gone. He senses the presence of those who once walked these halls, the kings, the builders, the monks. Their silence fills the air. The jungle begins to close in again. His guides, local villagers, grow uneasy. They claim spirits live here, that those who disturb the stones invite misfortune. Henri laughs softly, though he feels the weight of their warning. One night, as a storm rages, he dreams of figures moving through the rain. Robed monks walking the corridors, their lanterns flickering against the carvings. One turns to him, eyes glowing like embers. Henri wakes with a start. His fire has gone out. The forest hums with unseen life. By dawn, the rain has washed the world clean. He climbs to the highest terrace, the air thick with mist. Below him, the jungle stretches endlessly, green waves hiding centuries of memory. Above him, the towers reach for a sky that no longer remembers their name. Henri writes one last note in his journal. The grandeur of this forgotten empire should make us humble, not proud. For if such a people could vanish, so too can we. He stands in silence, listening. The wind moves through the corridors like breath. Somewhere, deep within the temple, water drips rhythmically, echoing like the slow ticking of time itself. Henri closes his eyes and imagines the city alive again. The processions, the music, the scent of incense, the prayers that once rose to the heavens. For a fleeting moment, he feels it. The pulse of the past, still beating beneath the vines. When he leaves, he does so reluctantly. His path through the jungle seems longer now, heavier with meaning. Every rustle, every shadow feels like a farewell. He glances back once more at the towers breaking through the canopy, not as ruins, but as sentinels of something eternal. He knows he will never see them again. But he also knows that the world will. Years later, his journals are published posthumously in France. The words travel faster than the man ever could. Scholars, explorers, dreamers, they all come, drawn by the same whisper through the trees. Angkor awakens again, not in faith, but in wonder. Yet even in rediscovery, the same question lingers in every heart. Was it faith that built this, or pride? Henri's last page is clear, the ink slightly smudged by rain. Empires fall, he wrote, but beauty endures. The story pauses here, not with an ending, but with a breath. The silence feels alive, as if the stones themselves are waiting for the next voice to remember them. Thanks for watching. If you were moved by this story, consider subscribing for more journeys into the heart of history.